Hi, so this is the first video I've ever made, so please forgive me for how awkward it might be already. So I went back, so carrying from the last meeting, I took my rubric findings and I took them to my students and pulled them up on the smart board and started running through some of the data. We only got to, this is how many people thought that they liked rubrics or they didn't like rubrics or somewhere in between. And we started comparing that to, do we think that rubrics accurately reflect grades? And so that's the only one that we got to, but I was really surprised to hear about how much they have to say about it. So it was really interesting. I post those notes online in my research minutes, but for the most part, they from the kids who got a chance to speak, because I had like a whole line of them, were saying that, I like that it tells me what to do, but it doesn't show quality. It's too general. I need the structure. Maybe it's more helpful in giving directions rather than being a grade, which I was like, that's really insightful. The one thing that really kind of got me is one person at the end was saying, in elementary school, writing used to be about us. It's not about us anymore. So they were saying that like when they were assessed on their writing, they got feedback that was about like, oh, I can see this about you as a writer, whereas now it's like, well, you didn't do this citation and this is this. So they were upset that they weren't getting feedback on them as a writer rather than on, they get it on the writing. So tomorrow we're supposed to have a good chunk of time after a test that they're taking, so I plan on doing more of a discussion with them then, since they were really engaged with it. So I wanted to ask them, again, like, what do you think rubrics assess you on based on some of the data that we got? They had a weird thing about rubrics do or do not grade their writing, so I wanted to ask, how do you think that they grade your writing? And I wanted to ask them, how would it grade you as a writer? And then ask them if they think that they are a writer, because that was really surprising. I want to first ask them, do you define yourself as a writer? Yes or no? And then like them to say why or why not. So I might have them do like a quick write on it, like an index card, and they'll take that with their name on it. And then I want to ask them, well, what is a writer? I'm nervous to ask them that question first before are you a writer, because I don't want them to build a class definition of, well, a writer is someone who does it professionally or someone who's a novelist. So I figured that if I ask them first, are you a writer, why or why not, and then we can bring it back together and say, well, what is a writer? And kind of go about it that way. I know we did the question in Kathy's class about like what is writing, but now I'm wondering like what is a writer, or what does a writer do, to bring that up to them. The other thing that I wanted to ask them is, how do teachers give you feedback? Because all of them were saying, well, not all of them. They either were saying, I want to know if I am a good writer or what I need to work on, and then some were just like, I just want to know if it's right or wrong. So I wanted to ask them, well, what kind of feedback do you get? Do you get the feedback that you're right or wrong? Do you get the feedback that, this is your strength, this is your weakness? So then I can kind of see how that compares. And I also wanted to ask, in what form does it come in? Like when you get feedback, does it come through a rubric? Do you get feedback on the rubric, or do you get feedback through like comments on your papers, and how they value it that way? So then those conversations, the data that I collected, I've been working on a teacher survey, but it's still kind of rough. The first question I want to ask them is, do you use rubrics to assess writing? And why do you use rubrics to assess writing? Why that method rather than a different method? Then I wanted to ask, do you like using rubrics to assess writing? Why or why not? And then this kind of gets into like the hacking question, how do you use rubrics? Or at least I'm hoping it goes into a hacking question. How do you use rubrics? As in what form or shape are they presented to students? I don't really like how this question's worded. Like I want to know like what your rubrics look like, so I don't know if I should like ask for a sample, or if I should like define what holistic is versus analytic and see if they like would just check that, or if they have a different way of doing it. I don't know how to frame that. So I'm like, that's what I'm caught on. Then I wanted to know, how do you give feedback to students using rubrics, and how do you grade students using rubrics? So I wanted to make sure I'm differentiating between the two. And then the last two questions, do rubrics assess the writing or the writer? Because I think that would be interesting to look at, like how the students say, like, well, 50-50, it assesses me as a writer, it assesses my writing, because I wonder, like, if the teachers think of it as I'm only assessing the writing, or if they only think of it as, oh, I'm helping the writer. Then the last thing I wanted to say is, what is more important to you, the writing or the writer? Because I'd like to compare that to the previous question, but I don't know if I should define important more. Like, what is more important to you? like in grading, or like what is more important to you in giving feedback on or in assessing. I don't know how to grade it. Like I want to compare it to the previous one, but I just don't know like how I want to word that. And I don't know if I'm going completely off the track, but I'm liking how all that's going. So apart from the surveys, working through the IRB review, so working on the proposal, and I'm in Derek Mueller's visual rhetoric class, which I've been really jonesed about. So basically the class is all about how can you visually create arguments, and how do like lines in particular, and like how lines are integrated with text, how can that create an argument, what does it mean? So I'm wondering if I can get some ideas from there about like how we might be able to like redefine rubrics, or how when this teacher uses a rubric in this way it's different, you know, like using visual rhetoric than the other rubrics that other teachers are using. So I'm wondering like maybe I'll do like a case study, and maybe this is down the road, I don't know. But I'm hoping that I'm going to be like acquiring some ideas from this class at any rate. And I think that's pretty much where I am at. So as far as like a timeline goes, just finishing up this discussion with my students. So I've been doing field notes, pretty proud of myself with that. Doing field notes, finishing up a teacher survey, and then finishing up that proposal to kick that out. And part of that proposal will be the rest of my timeline. And that's pretty much it. So I'm sorry I'm missing you, but thank you for everything, and I'll see you in a few months.